Hey y'all, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Poly Side Eye with me and Jared. How are you today?
I'm not too bad on this beautiful day in Philadelphia. I'm being sarcastic. The weather has been atrocious. Really like the last 2 weeks, the weather, with the exception of like a day or two, the weather has been hot garbage.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm waiting for summer at some point.
Yeah. Well, I don't need the pits of hell summer, but like I want, like a little bit of, you know, be able to put my hoochie daddy shorts on.
we, we know. So this
That's a
is our
pretty.
this, this is our 48th episode, by the way.
Yeah, we have to do something big for 50. Yeah. Hope maybe there might be some like big political event or something. Who knows?
Oh, I could think of one. I could think, and I can't say it.
Oh,
So the title of this episode is The Political Economy of Sex and Intimacy. It's a sequel to one of our earlier episodes, The Political Economy of Dating. And the inspiration for this topic was, look, I was in my kitchen listening to Kristen Davis's podcast. If you don't know, she plays Charlotte from Sex and the City, and she's doing like a recap of like the old episodes. And she had Candice Bushnell, who's the original Carrie Bradshaw. She created the series, and she was talking about how like people are not having a lot of sex these days as they did in the 90s or maybe like 30 years ago. And she was bringing up all these points, social points, because I think the episode they were talking about, I think one of the characters didn't have sex in 3 months, and she was like, that's not a lot these days. Like sometimes people go without sex for 3 years. And look, I know some people that are in draughts themselves. I'm not going to say any names, but yeah, like I really agree with that. And I text you and I was like, we had this conversation before.
yeah. So I thought it was interesting because, again, like we already kind of did an episode about this, but it was more focused. We kind of talked about like sex and intimacy a little bit, but I feel like we mainly talked about the fact that fewer people are getting married, are in some type of like committed relationship or dating at all. So like if you're interested, you should go watch the first episode where we talk more about, the dating aspect. But for this one, I thought it was interesting because this focused more so again on like the intimacy of the sex part. Of
Yeah.
that. It's definitely connected for sure, but not necessarily like directly correlated.
Mm-hmm. I guess the question we're posing, I guess more so to the single folks, is are people having less sex than they were 20, 30 years ago? And then you pose these questions.
Yeah, so I was just curious. So most people know I study political science or teach political science, but I'm really interested in obviously political economy. So I'm really interested in thinking about how capitalism, which is the society that we live in, shapes like all sorts of our behaviors. But I've been really interested in like dating and romanticism and intimacy because I've talked to so many people. I've seen I sent you this thread on Twitter, and like people are so cynical and so misanthropic about it all. And so I'm really interested in that. And so what I wanted to do was, obviously it's not scientific or anything, but I just asked people on Instagram if they'd be willing to share with me, some share kind of how much sex they're having, if they wish they could have more of it, if they're not having as much sex as they wanted to, like what do they feel like were the barriers, I guess, to stopping that from happening. And I was actually surprised. I wasn't expecting to get many responses just because it's such a, kind of a personal question. I don't think people like to talk about their sex lives, especially with, people that you don't know.
You don't think people like to talk about their sex lives? I mean,
So I think people like to talk about sex in general, but like I think a lot of people lie, like on social media. There's actually pretty solid evidence behind that people lie about their sexual behaviors and how much sex they're having. But I think when it comes to like really divulging their own experiences, especially with people like, they don't know like intimately. I think people are a little less willing to do that. But I got about like 25 people who responded to my questions, and it was interesting because I also got like a good distribution of people. So I got quite a few like straight women who responded. I got obviously quite a few of the gay guys who responded. But the big takeaway that I found is that pretty much everybody, with the exception of a handful of people, were saying that they didn't have as much sex as they would like to. People gave different reasons for it. So like some of straight women, some of them were married, and so they were like, life, bills, kids, that sort of thing. Like it's kind of hard to, make tons of time for that. So life be life, and essentially. But then there were some people who were like, I would like to have more sex, but I don't really want to have like random sex. Like I would rather it be with somebody that, I'm interested in or have some type of connection with, which I thought was interesting because, we live in this society where we treat sex like a commodity. So the fact that there was a number of people that were saying that was fascinating to me. But I would say on average, most people said that within a month, they had sex between like 2 to 4 times. That was like the average. So they had some people who said 0. There were quite a few zeros actually. And then there were some people who were like in the teens and higher. So that kind of brought the average up. So the median was probably more like 2 to 3 times a month. And very few, I only had like 3 or 4 people who said they were satisfied with the amount of sex that they were having. So yeah, just all that would be interesting for a discussion.
So can we go over the poll questions that you asked? Because look, I think that I'm going to do a live answering of these questions because one of us has to. You don't have to.
I'm playing analyst. So yeah, like I have to put on my like objective researcher hat. So yeah, you can be the guinea pig.
And I would just like to say, y'all, this is usually Patreon content, patreon.com/cdiggy1. But you know what? For the interest of science and research, I'm going to participate in this poll. So I got 5 of your questions here. The first one is your relationship status, whatever that means to you. I am definitely single. I think people know that. Gender identification, male. How many times a month, on average, do you have sex? Not including masturbation.
Yeah, I have to put that.
Now the question is, would you consider sex? But I honestly cannot remember the last time I had sex. Average, damn. It might be a 0 to 1. It might be 0 to 1. Might. Okay. Number 4, and feel free, y'all, to answer this in the comments to make it fun. If you would like to have more sex than you currently are, would you like to have more sex than you currently are? I believe so. Yes. Yeah. If you answered yes to question 4, what do you think is preventing you from having more sex? And look, I would say rapport, and I would say like just getting to know someone, and I'm picky as hell. And I think that's it. And also dating, it takes time. Like you have to like sift through stuff. Like you have to organize when you're going to meet the person. Do they have time? Usually some of my guys they don't live in New York. So then, there's travel involved and stuff like that. So yeah, that is enough of my business. But yes.
So can I ask, I'm not anything super personal, but like, what are your reservations about like, let's say getting on Tinder or some app and being like, hey, let's link up and like do the thing? Like, why don't you do that?
Well,
wait, I'm sorry. I was laughing at dress your age comment. That is the realest comment. I'm not leaving my house.
I'm not having sex because I don't leave my house. I mean, sometimes, you get that clarity nut, and then you just be like, you know what? Let me turn this date map off. I'm good. I'm good for like a few more days. But anyway, I feel like what's stopping me is usually I have to sift through guys. Like I know what I want at this big age of almost being 40. It's probably my fault.
You know what you
But
want in terms of like how they look physically, or
physically, and then once we go into conversation, like what are their intentions? Like, do I like this person? And then getting to know someone, and then getting to the level of, oh, let's meet. And
okay,
after that, it's probably been maybe like a week and some change, and then we have to like align our schedules to meet. So all that probably takes about a week and a half to 2 weeks. There's really no time where I'm like meeting someone as soon as I swipe right.
right? And you never are like, hey, I know it's 11 p.m., but how about you slide over here?
Those are reserved for people that I've known, and we already have that rapport, and that's not that many.
Okay, okay.
So, yeah.
So this is interesting because one thing they were talking about in the episode you sent me was the fact that one of the what's the other woman's name? Not Kristen Davis, but the other woman.
Candace Bushnell.
Right. So she used to be like, yeah, like 30 years ago, people we used to just, have all the sex. Like we'd be out and like, dancing or whatever. And we just, go home and, do the thing. Like it just was like everybody was doing it. But she made the point that the reason people are having less sex is because people work too much. And so I thought that was interesting because that brought in like the political economic kind of component. So that raises the question of like, well, why are people working more now? If this is in fact true, it's an empirical question. Like we can, I can't accept it outright. I think that's true, but like, if that is true, like, why is it the case that people are working more now than, let's say, our parents did 30 years ago?
And sorry to cut you off. I'm just glad that we're making the connection to, the political economy and to sex.
Right.
Yeah.
So of course, I had to bring in the books because I don't I'm just like speaking off the cuff. So if you're interested, so there's a sociologist. Her name is I believe it's Eva Illouz. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. But she wrote a series of books that I call her love series. I don't know if she calls it that, but if she doesn't, she should, because it's all of the books kind of go hand in hand. So the first book that I read by her it came out like the late 90s. It's called Consuming the Romantic Utopia. So what she argues is that part of the reason people can't like find, or romance is because our expectations of what that should be are all structured by essentially what we see on television and like what we see in movies, in Disney movies. Essentially we have this like vision of romance as being, we have to be swept off our feet, and we have to, feel the butterflies, and we have to feel like Ariel when she's emerged out of the water and realize that she had sprouted legs. Like we have to feel all that for it to be legitimate. But what she tries to argue is like, while there is some element of that sometimes in like developing romantic feelings towards somebody, towards another person, oftentimes it's a lot more mundane than that. But we think that if we don't feel that somehow is like a flag or a sign that there's no spark or like we're not interested. And she challenges to really take that into to really reconsider that and really asks us to think, why do we feel as though romanticism or being romantic has to feel that way? And she argues that because of the culture, so because of Hollywood essentially. Now in her second book, she is called Why Love Hurts. So she talks about the fact that love is oh, I know, right? She talks about the fact that love is paradoxical in the sense that and this one's really Freudian, so if you're really into like psychoanalysis, like you'll really like this one, because one thing that she talks about is that love is at the same time the source of so much of our pleasure, but also the source of so much of our pain. And we know this from like just day-to-day life. Like even when we're talking about like loving our friends and like our family, like the joy it often gives us to be around people that we care about and who, pour into us emotionally and just make us feel comfortable. But by the same token, like we know when a loved one dies, like the type of pain that it inflicts on us. So we're kind of caught, she argues, in this kind of situation in which we avoid love because we recognize the pain that it can bring. But in doing that, we also reject all of the positive kind of feelings that it develops inside of us that she argues is a very human feeling that we deprive ourselves of. So yeah, that's the other one. And then the last one is called, this one's less optimistic. It's called The End of Love. So this one is essentially about how capitalism has turned so many of our relations into purely transactions. So like when we go on Tinder, we essentially are going into a marketplace and we're shopping essentially, like is just as you would if you went in Walmart or another store. Like, oh, I want this, and this thing in a person. This person has this. Oh, they don't have that. Oh, maybe need to reconsider. And she's like, yeah, but like what that misses is the whole like subjective element, in the sense that human beings aren't just a collection of like, we're not just a collection of like personalities. Like we're full human beings. And so like you really can't appreciate the fullness of a person if you just kind of disaggregate that somebody that way. But that's how we've been trained to think about everything in our lives, not only dating, but like work, whether or not to buy a house. Everything is just like transactional cost benefit analysis. And she argues that that type of analysis is really antagonistic to the development of the type of affect necessary to really engage and to let your guard down, and to like, but letting your guard down again invokes the whole idea of being hurt. So like she really ties all these threads together really well. So I would like highly recommend reading those things. I'm
definitely gonna put those 3 books in. Like, well, send me the titles and the author, so I can put it in the description.
I will do all. Yes, I will do all of that.
And also to the audience, this is live or whatever. So please feel free to join the conversation. If you have a question concerning the topic, please, put it below. I'll do one right now. Do you know the ages of the people who responded to gauge how that is spread out? To your I guess.
So I didn't ask people's age, but I did. But the Pew Research Center. So I sent you a link to this too. So the Pew Research Center is a survey firm or a research firm, very reputable. Like quite a few people in sociology and political science and econ, et cetera, cite their research. It's all very rigorous, et cetera. So in 2023, they surveyed people, asking them about like their dating lives and their relationship status and how much sex they were having. And what they found was that really the people who are having the best sex right now are like Gen X people. Actually like Gen X and the baby boomers are actually having the most and the best sex right now, which is interesting because typically it's the inverse. Typically people have more sex when they're younger, and as they get older, or historically that's been the case. But what they've been finding is that it's flipped. So like Gen Z is not having nearly as much sex as, let's say, the baby boomers are. They're having less sex also than millennials. So in this article or this research, this article that Pew published, they said right now, roughly 6 in 10 young men, and they characterize young as being anybody under the age of 30. 6 in 10 of them are single. That's pretty striking. So that's men. Most of them said that they're not even interested in dating or meeting someone, which I also think we can talk about this, because we really need to talk about the cynicism. That's the thing I'm most interested in, because if we think about the quote unquote American dream, like the pillars of the American dream are essentially a quote unquote a good job, buying a house, and marriage and family. Essentially, it seemingly the last two, home ownership and the family and kids, are off the table for a lot of people. So I've been wondering, like, okay, well, what does that mean for people's understanding of like what they should be living for? If people might need to reconsider that. But then the last thing they said in the article, well, they talked about other things, but one other thing that I thought was interesting was that they young people aren't even going on casual dates as much. So only 42% of people who are currently single said that they were actually like going on casual dates. Like they define casual dates as like at least once a month, like going out with the purposes of getting to know somebody. Only 42%, so less than half. So Yeah, it's a lot. So I'm just curious, like, I would love to hear what other people think about like why it is that, people seem to be so disenchanted with dating, or themselves if they're not really on the prowl. Like, why is it that that's the case?
And let us know that in the chat, audience. What you sent me, one of the articles, something that stood out, like they were focusing on ages 22 to 34 because that's the like age range where normally like marriage and kids come into play. What they said was the major decline is in sex between people who only had sex with one person in the prior year, basically monogamous sex. And this is because one of the biggest drivers of declining sexual activity is decline in marriage. Married people have more sex, and for most young adults, marriage is occurring later or not at all. As a result, sex is declining.
Yeah, so the marriage component is interesting. Here's another book. Now this book, so let me give a little bit of background before I put it up here. But like, there's a lot of research that has tried to understand like the origins of the family and the origins of like the institutions of marriage. Like, why is it that we have this particular kind of idea of like, this kind of the nuclear family, if you will, kind of what the point is. And so this book is really interesting. It's called The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State, by Friedrich Engels. So again, a lot of this is contested. People differ on like the origin. Anthropologists are still, researching these things. But like really what is pretty consistent across a lot of these books is like, marriage is really, and a lot of feminists have critiqued, the family for this reason and saying that, it really is oppressive to women in the sense that marriage has generally been about property rights and who do we kind of bequeath our property to, in the sense that, if you are a man, you can't, you have to kind of know, who's birthing your child, and you kind of have to have some good dibs on it, if you will, unlike ensuring that, the woman that's giving birth to your child is going to keep your lineage going. So it is rooted in this very like private property-esque kind of understanding of like how relationships should be organized. But what I always say is like there were political economic reasons for that, in the sense that if you have a system or you have a way of organizing society that relies heavily on inheritance and passing things on and property rights, then you kind of need to like kind of delineate or like specify who is related to whom and kind of put bounds on the type of relationships people are having. But one thing he talks about here is that, monogamy even though people in, let's say, pre-modern societies, even if people were coupled, it wasn't necessarily always the case that couples were only having sex with each other. So like it was very common actually for women to have sex with other men that they weren't necessarily coupled with. And so he argues that monogamy really only crystallizes as kind of an ideal or an idea, really kind of with the, once it becomes clear that, inheritance and passing on property is becoming, more and more of a kind of commonplace thing. And so my whole thing is like, if that's the case, if like, and I don't want people to misconstrue me. I'm not like pro or anti monogamy or anything. Like to me, all of these ways it should be, I believe the notion that freedom is the right to non-conformity. Like to be free is to be able to kind of like create your own conditions of existence to the extent that you can. Obviously we live in a society, but like, we should be building towards a world where people feel as though they can not necessarily conform to something just because. And so my whole thing is like, well, maybe people are conforming to ideals and ideas that are antiquated, or maybe they're anachronistic. Maybe they made sense, millennia ago, but maybe they don't make sense now. And so can we get to a place where we can question these things? I don't really think we can. I think that there's still such a normative kind of assumption about how all relationships should look. I don't know if there's really, I haven't seen much. Maybe somebody can like, point me in the direction, but I haven't really seen much kind of widespread, discussion or widespread, kind of critique of the way that we create relationships in our society. I haven't seen it. Again, I'm open to pointing me in the right direction. So yeah, so I'd be curious to hear what people think about that. Maybe what people need to start doing is like creating their own contracts and not trying to, as Eva Lou says here, not try to live the romantic utopia, not try to live the vision of a relationship that we saw in Beauty and the Beast. Well, I guess that's kind of weird because I don't think anybody ever envisioned falling in love with a beast that was very verbally abusive to you for like 90% of the movie, and then in the last, well, I guess like 75% of the movie, and then like the last quarter, out of nowhere. Anyway, I love Beauty and the Beast, but yeah, you see what I'm saying. So
Yeah. And I was gonna go back to that, like the Zsa Zoo of it all. Like I remember someone, I'm not gonna say broke up with me, but broke things off because they didn't feel a spark. Do you remember that person I told you about? Yeah. It was so eye rolling. And look, I get it. Like you want to have that feeling around that person. And I get that, but I get what you're saying where it can be kind of silly where you try to expect that in every encounter just immediately.
yeah, so she talks about this concept of like love at first sight, which I think people shorthand and just say that there's something there that's like drawing you to that person. Obviously, it's not necessarily a bad thing to feel that. I'm not saying that that is it's wrong if you feel that way. But I think sometimes we put too much weight on it in the sense that, you know, those things might be fleeting. And so, like, what are you going to do when that sensation isn't there? Or conversely, maybe it's the case that you didn't feel it outright, but like as you get to know the person, you might start to develop some type of like, you know, affect in that way. But what happens is because of the way that, again, we think about relationships so transactionally, like if the person doesn't like check off these boxes kind of at the outset, we're just like, yeah, no, it's not going to work. And we already like classified them before we move on. And what she would say is like, well, that's such a like antisocial way of thinking about like relationships of any sort, not even like romantic ones. Like when you meet, you know, friends or somebody that you find interesting, it's not like, oh, like from now, usually like these things take time. Like you learn people, you learn their idiosyncrasies, you learn, you know, all these things that you didn't know about them that you find interesting about them. And then you become friends. And so like, why do we think that relationships have to operate significantly different? I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but like, what is the motivation behind that? I'm curious to hear. Also, I do want to get to some of the questions because there's some funny ones in here.
Yeah. I'm gonna start at the top. Let's see. It's also because people are like also more scared these days, I guess, as a talking about dating. I went on a date.
What exactly are they scared of? Scared of other people? Scared of society? Scared of the capitalist economy? Scared of nuclear warfare? Like, what are people afraid of per se? I don't disagree, but I'm just curious. Yeah.
I went on a date last night. It was good until he said he was a Donnie supporter. Are we dating them or nah? I mean, yeah. Yes, I would argue that the rich are not having sex like that either. When Todd and Candy first got married, they weren't having any sex. I love how you just connect this to Real Housewives of Atlanta. I don't think Jared would know who I'm talking about.
No, I actually do know who Candy is because Candy's the escape one, and you know Todd. I actually do know. Surprisingly, I actually get this reference. And to me, kind of underscores the fact that marriage really has nothing to do with. I won't say nothing. Marriage doesn't necessarily have to do with intimacy or love. Like sometimes it can be about like property. Like Candy probably is like, okay, look, like I'm trying to accumulate some wealth. It's easier to do that with two people than one. Let's combine our forces. I don't know. She also probably signed a prenup. So like, who knows?
Marriage serves no purpose to me. I'm not going to have kids. Why would I get the state that involved in my life? Tried being married. It's a hell nah for me. Never again.
I would love to know. I want to hear. I'm always interested in people who are married, in especially like people that I guess in my age cohort. Like there was this woman I work out with, and she posted on Facebook like 2 weeks ago that she and her husband were getting a divorce. It was like this long kind of message about how, you know, they decided to first uncouple and then decided to get a divorce. But they were still on good terms, and like, you know, she wanted to say that because she felt guilty about it, and like, you know, it was almost like a shame around it. I was just like, I think part of that is too what's going on. I think people realize or think at some fundamental level, because this isn't going to last forever, the odds are probably that it's not going to last forever. I think people do get really nervous about like it ending, and she talked about that too in The End of Love. Like, so yeah.
You got to answer to your scared question. Scared of being rejected, scared of being accepted overall. I've talked to younger people who have full-blown anxiety attacks about just talking to someone. It's wild.
So this is interesting in the sense that there's a really interesting book I would recommend. I don't think I have it in my bookshelf here. I think it's in my office, but it's called The Lonely Crowd. So it's a book that came out in like the 1950s, I believe, maybe late 1950s, early 1960s. And essentially what the thrust of the book is, it's about, you know, how do people develop their sense of like self? So in modern societies, you know, the reason we're always so anxious and always kind of worried about like self-actualization and all this shit is because, you know, in modern societies, we're tasked with like becoming something of ourselves. Whereas, you know, in medieval societies, that wasn't really the case, or in slave societies, that wasn't really the case. Like people, for, you know, whatever metaphysical reasons, had already had their kind of lot in life kind of, you know, ordained for them. So there really wasn't that sense of like ambivalence that we feel. And so what they talk about in that book is that, you know, in our society where we essentially don't have any ownership of what we do, in the sense that we do the work that pays us. Like when we go to work, we're pretty much told what to do. Some of us might have a little bit more flexibility, but by and large, like we're told what to do or what we can't do or how we have to dress or like, you know, what's appropriate, what's not. And so what they argue is that we become an other directed society. So they distinguish this between an inner directed society and a tradition directed society. So they say in tradition directed societies, people are less anxious because, again, they already have a blueprint to follow, a tradition, whether that's religious or not. In inner directed societies, they argue that it's still focused on traditions, but most of those traditions have been internalized largely through like the family and social institutions. But in our society, we don't really have those institutions anymore because the family is disintegrating, because people aren't getting married as much. They aren't having those types of, you know, communities like in the way that they used to. So the way that people seek validation or some sense of like self is through recognition from others. So that's what they say, other directed. And so because of that, so much of our personality is shaped by how we think other people might perceive us in a way that hasn't really been true for most of recorded human history. Anyway, it's a really interesting book if you're interested. And so I think, to Joyce's point, I think what we're seeing is really a very high level expression of this kind of other directed society.
Dress your age. That's what you're. I realize I don't really like people all that much, and that's my problem. That is my problem too, actually.
So like, can I ask Dress Your Age to elaborate a little bit what she means when she says when you don't like people? What exactly is it about people that you don't like? I mean, you obviously like some people, because I'm sure you don't live in a bunker. So like you have to interact with somebody, I would think you like. But yeah, so I just want to know a little bit more.
I guess for me, just dealing with, I don't really like small talk like that. And I just really have to really sift through people on dating apps and stuff like that. Like before I go on a date, like I really need to know, am I wasting my time or not? I don't want to just go out on a date. I want to make sure, we have things in common. They can hold a conversation before we have a date, you know, stuff like that. I know you SMHing me, but yeah, it's just how I feel.
No, you know, I don't judge like that. I know, like I have the answers. Like we all just out here winging it. So like I'm just sharing my thoughts on these things, but I don't have the, you know, monopoly on the way the world works. But yeah, so like to that point, I mean I get it. I think part of it is like we just live in such a you know, as I've said in a lot of episodes, like we really do live in a very antisocial world, in the sense that so much of our interactions are mediated through the internet. So there's another really good book about this called Hyperconnectivity and its Discontents. So they talk about like, what does it mean that so much of our social relations are mediated through technology in a way that hasn't really been true ever before. And, there's a lot of things that we can glean, that we can learn from what people post about themselves on social media or how they answer questions. But we also know that that's not necessarily enough. And people also can, misrepresent themselves in all sorts of ways. And so like, sometimes there is a certain degree of like uncertainty, but I feel like people don't like uncertainty. Like, I feel like it bothers people when they are I mean, I've never had an issue with ambiguity and uncertainty, but I know it really bothers a lot of people. So that's always been fascinating to me.
I'm Gen Z, and honestly, it's so hard to date nowadays. I'm part of the problem. I love being by myself and have very peculiar hobbies. I don't want to have a Ralph in my basement. That is a Housewives of Atlanta reference, by the way. Just meaning that you don't want to be in a nasty divorce with somebody and they're living in your basement.
Yeah, I mean, so how have y'all? So okay, let me pose a question to the chat. I know we've been talking for a minute.
But, I can't find men on my level. Look.
So there is something to that. So in the sense that women have become, let's be honest, like most people want date within their class. So if you went to college, like the odds are you're going to date somebody that also went to college, not just because of the degree, but because of what sociologists call a habitus. And so like the habitus is essentially our framework for making sense of the world, what we think is important, what we should care about, our cultural tastes, our preferences about things, consumption habits, all of that is our habitus. And people who, share a similar habitus typically want to, date that type of person. So if you went to school, you probably would also date somebody who went to school. And so what's happening is that women are finding that, there is I was looking at Twitter the other day, people were like, hand-wringing over the fact that men weren't going to college as much, especially Black men. That's actually a trend that's been going on for decades. But yeah, and so like, there is this idea of like, well, I don't want to date somebody that, is not in the same social class as me. There, people aren't going to say that, but like, that's really what it amounts to. So I mean, I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just kind of like a sociological reality.
Got it. Let's see. So just going back from the poll.
Can you talk about this Amanda Seales thing? Because I was really, what somebody says Amanda Seales told Gen Z not to have sex. Like, what's that about?
I haven't heard anything about that. I don't keep up with Amanda Seales. Amanda Seales told us not to have sex. You might have to, I don't know, Rich the Fish, please let us know, expound upon that.
I was going to ask a question, but it's kind of shady and I don't want it to like come for us.
Please, what's the question?
I was like, is it because she's not having it? So it's like misery loves company?
Sounds about right. I can't imagine. I mean, she runs everyone off, so it's men included.
I'm not going to participate in this.
Also, I just wanted to say, like,
do a crossover episode with Amanda Seales. That would be fun. Oh man,
I'm still waiting for the day I pass her in public. I know it's going to be so awkward. Also, I was just thinking about when someone, huh?
No, she moved to LA.
Oh, she's back in New York.
Oh, okay. Okay, we've talked about Amanda Seales enough. What were you saying?
I was saying my work schedule also is a factor because look, 7 days in a week, I work 4 of them. I'm also a content creator, so that's already a second job. I'm usually off like a Sunday and a Monday, and if I'm lucky, 1 day during the week, but normally it's 5 days out the week. So then it gives me 2 days to myself. And I have I still have social obligations, things I want to do, things I want to do with friends. And then I got to make time for strangers. It's just sometimes like you don't even have time to meet new people.
Yeah. So there is, I understand that. So kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about people working a lot. are working more than they used to. So I think there is something to that, but I think also the nature of people's work has changed a lot. So Arlie Hochschild is a sociologist who has written pretty extensively on what she calls emotional labor. And what she argues is that in a service-based economy, most of us aren't necessarily doing, some of us are doing physical labor, but like not of the sort that people were doing in like, the coal mines or whatever. But it's a labor of a different sort in the sense that we have to expend not only our physical selves, but also our emotional selves too. So that depletes us in another way that makes it hard to forge the types of like social connections outside of work. So really capitalism is absorbing not only our physical bodies, but also our psychic and our emotional bodies as well. And so like we don't really have much left over. And so part of the reason I think people are really reticent to like meet new people is because we all know like meeting new people can actually be exhausting because you're having to expend more energy and like asking more questions, and like silence is a lot more uncomfortable when you're with somebody you don't know. Whereas, when you and me hang out, we'll just be like, sitting in silence, watching like whatever, doing the fuck, like it just whatever the fuck, like it doesn't matter. But like when you just meet somebody new, like people feel the need that everything kind of has to be, every moment needs something, we have to be doing something. And so I think because the amount of energy we have to expend when we meet somebody new, I think a lot of us are just like, we're so depleted from our emotional labor from work. Like I know after I'm done teaching, like I just want to like curl up in a ball and go to sleep. Like I don't want to, it's just because you just have to be on and you have to, it's just so, yeah. So there's definitely something not just to how much we work, but like the type of work we do too. Being on Zoom all day, being in meetings all day, that's emotional labor. Because you really have to be a performance artist, and being a performance artist 7 days a week or however many days is a lot.
Yeah, that really resonated. Also, the people in the chat as they're telling you to preach, but yeah, I didn't realize that. Like I'm on a date, I don't want there to be silence, and I want them to be impressed by me. Like I have to have a good impression. Like it's a lot.
Well, you know what Uma Thurman said in Pulp Fiction? Well, that's how you know that you've met someone special, because you can shut the fuck up and comfortably enjoy silence. For the Pulp Fiction fans out there.
I am one of them. I remember that. I don't think humans were meant to be this busy.
No, like Marx talked about true freedom as like leisure time. Like, no, we shouldn't be working. We shouldn't be selling our labor. We should be doing things that give us joy and like pleasure and like challenge us and make us think and develop. All of us are artists. We all like to create. Like humans are inherently creative creatures. So like what we should be doing is being creative and doing things that we want to do, but we can't do that because capitalism ensures that that's not possible. At least it's only possible for a select few people. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's why we have to transition to socialism somehow.
I knew that word was coming. So this is an update from what she said with the Gen Z comment. She said that Gen Z should be careful and only make soul connections, and that we're the last of a generation. She said we need celibacy and we're hot between our legs. It's all over the place.
The data that I just cited early on, especially in that last point, doesn't corroborate that, because Gen Z is having less sex than pretty much anybody else. So like, really who's hot between the legs right now are the baby boomers and the Gen Xers. So like maybe they're the ones that need to, slow their, no. First off, like that's not the problem. The problem is I'm never gonna blame individuals because we live in a society. So like individuals we're not just, out here just do like, no, like we're products of the society that we're in. So we live in a society that depletes people physically, emotionally, leaves them with a sense of dread and no sense of like a future. Well, of course they're gonna not be comfortable cultivating those. So like I would rather focus on those conditions and see if there's any type of way we can understand them and hopefully change them, as opposed to like, getting your moral high ground and just, wagging your finger at people. But yeah, I mean, she gonna say what she says.
Yeah. So we're getting to the conclusion, y'all, to the end of the video. So out of the poll questions, like, what have we learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think what what I wanted people to take away from this is, so one thing I think I also see a lot of is a lot of people blaming themselves. I think this is, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like this is especially true for straight women. It's one or two ways. People either blame themselves, like, what is it that I'm not offering? What is it that I'm lacking? Um, that is leading me not to have, a robust dating or romantic life. It's always either that or it's pretty much niggas ain't shit and nothing in between. And what I wanted this episode to be was to try to
I had that written down. I had that written down. Like outside of the niggas ain't shitness of it all.
So I didn't want people to blame themselves, and I didn't want people to be misanthropic. I wanted to excavate a lot of the in between and try to show people that no, there are like societal and like political and like economic conditions that make these types of things like possible. And so, like, because of that, in theory, we could do things hopefully to like change those conditions. Not saying it's gonna happen overnight, but like at least the possibility is there. If it's just niggas ain't shit or I suck, there's really nothing you can do about those two things. So I wanted to give people some sense of like, it's complicated, and we live in a complex society. I don't want people to be misanthropic and cynical.
Right. And did you speak on the cynicism at all? I knew you were talking about it earlier. You pointed that out already, right?
Yeah. So like some of the responses that I got when I asked the people on Instagram was kind of like, dating sucks, like men suck. That's some variation of like niggas ain't shit, essentially. I got quite a few of those responses. And again, like I get that feels good to say, it feels cathartic, but like that's really not the problem. Like it might be a problem, but it's not the problem. And so even if that is the case, the niggas ain't shit, like the next question should be like, well, why aren't they? And you really can't, ask that question if you kind of take that for granted. So like, yeah, I just wanted to, as we always do, try to offer an intellectual kind of lens to think about these things.
Yeah. So this was a fun conversation. I'm glad that we covered this in our our show, because the political economy of dating. I just wanted to expound upon that. Let's see. So I will put all the books that you said. Well, send it to me, especially the 3-part one.
Oh yeah, I'll text it to you.
It'll be in the description, y'all. Our 50th episode is coming up. I'm wondering, what could it be?
Yeah, so like maybe we can get a fan vote. So like if people can tell us like if there's a subject that people are interested in hearing about, or maybe there's something that we haven't really delved into. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, let me see. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting, but this was very political and interesting. I did get excited about the mention of sex in the name.
Glad you like, and thank you for being so interactive and like sharing your comments.
Yeah, we love interaction from the audience. So yeah, with that, y'all, thank you for watching. And if you want to follow Jared, he's on Instagram as well as Twitter, same name, JC Tiger Fan. I'm so glad you just have it in the chat now. Well, in your little box.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with that, y'all, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and share. And we will see y'all for the next episode.